This week in the security news, we talk about how a hacker took over a smart home with vulgar music and rising temperatures. Sounds like a scene from a TV show. A security warning for 23 million YouTube creators following a crazy hack attack. Is that a hack attack? It's either a hack or... Anyway, Vimeo is sued for storing faceprints of people without their permission. Selfie Android apps push ads and can record audio, and how adopting DevOps leads to an improved security posture, or does it? In our second segment, we're airing 3 pre-recorded interviews from the SE Village at DEF CON with Billy Boatwright, Edward Miro, and Jason Street. In our final segment, 2 more pre-recorded interviews from SE Village with Perry Carpenter and Chris Edwards. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to Logarithm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, Logarithm provides security made smarter. Is your IT team ready to face the next implementation or upgrade? Do you have a pool of talented team members who are trained and ready to support your organization's growth? The right IT skills development platform can get you past the IT skills gap. With training content that's so engaging, some even call it binge-worthy learning, your team will watch and learn more with IT Pro TV. Get a free team trial of IT Pro TV today. Visit securityweekly.com/IT Pro TV. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIEM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today.
And welcome to the show. But first, an introduction is in order. He's a man who likes his martinis, his smart homes, and his porn, both hot and dirty. Mr. Paul Sidorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode 621, recorded on September 26th, 2019, right here in G-Unit Studios in lovely Rhode Island. With me here today in studio, Security Weekly CEO Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. And the hot and dirty joke comes from me for the martinis. So you're welcome.
They're delicious.
And the smart homes from one of the stories tonight. And, well, I just know Paul enough about the porn. So
Yeah, you know me well enough. Sometimes too well. But, we'll save that for after the show. Larry Pesce is here in studio. Larry, welcome.
Thank you. This shirt happened to be right on the top of the pile today, so it was the appropriate shirt.
It's awesome.
Yep.
It's awesome.
So to that,
we also drink because Jeff says PCI.
And Jeff is on the lines remotely. Welcome, Mr. Jeff Mann. How are you, Jeff?
I'm having a hard time adjusting to these early news segments. I got to just drink early and fast.
Drink earlier, yes.
Right.
Your scotch and or bourbon and or whiskey was blurry. Is that...
Let me try to make it clearer.
There you go.
I think you got to pull it close. Oh,
there you go.
It only
There you
lives
go.
in out-of-focus areas.
What is that, Jeff? Is that bourbon, scotch, whiskey?
Rye.
Rye
Yeah,
whiskey.
he's a rye guy.
Very
Rye
nice.
whiskey.
Rye guy.
Very nice. Lee Neely, he's got something in his mystery cup. Mr. Lee Neely's on the lines remotely. Welcome, Lee.
Good to be here from Livermore because I'm at work. It's a legal substance, so that's no alcohol involved, but I will struggle through somehow.
So what you're saying, that's filled with bourbon.
It's
in your
Irish
glass.
coffee.
It's Irish coffee.
vodka.
Mexican coffee.
Vodka.
Yeah.
Vodka, it's clear liquid.
And Mr. Tyler is here with a special guest appearance. Tyler Robinson, welcome. Representing your company there, Nisos. Very nice. Very nice.
As always.
And
Front and center.
beverage?
Coffee today.
Tyler, have you been on our shows before? Maybe as kind of like a guest, kind of in the. I feel like you've definitely
I've been on a couple of times guests. Let's see, we did the 500 episode. I think we've done the technical segment.
Yep, he's been here in the studio a couple times.
Gotcha.
Been on the show.
Yeah. Well, so give our audience a little background on what you're up to today, Tyler, because you have not been a official guest co-host on the show in the past.
Yeah, let's see. Currently running operations as a director over at Nisos, doing a lot of red team, a lot of cool research and design.
Which makes me sad, by the way.
Yeah, unfortunately, Larry and I have
no longer work together.
Now work together in a different capacity, so it works great.
Well,
so yeah, definitely doing a lot of cool stuff, working with very, very large companies, trying to solve some really big problems within security from the offensive aspect for me, obviously.
And it looks like you're broadcasting from a church. Is that? I
the
get
Church
that.
of Tea today. I flew in late last night from Boston, and so yeah, we're in the Church of Tea and not in my office. So hanging out at home today.
Excellent. Let's see. Quick announcement. EC Council. Listen up, is offering our listeners now a free pass. That's right, free, as in free beer, to attend the 2-day conference. Use the discount code HH19SW when you register to get your free ticket to Hacker Halted, or go to securityweekly.com/Hacker Halted. Jeff and I will be both speaking there. I'm super excited for that. I've got some little tweaks to make to my talk there, which I gave yesterday. At the Compass Cybersecurity Symposium here in Rhode Island.
We're also going to do some sponsored interviews, other community interviews, and grab some more content while we're down there.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
And smoke cigars.
And smoke cigars.
And
yes.
drink rye and bourbon and vodka and whatever else has
typical Security
alcohol.
Weekly conference appearance. Right.
Of course.
So we need your help in a survey we're running for research purposes. How mature is your process automation for your various security capabilities? This is just a mouthful. SecurityWeekly.com/5 stages of automation security, and submit your responses to our 5 stages of automation maturity survey.
You know, it would get a lot easier if we just get the new website out and people go survey, click.
Right. Or, if we had an easy, like SecurityWeekly.com/unicorns might be easier.
Ooh, unicorns.
Unicorns, cool. Right?
Ooh, nice.
So, let's see. We're talking about news stories. Gentlemen, start your engines.
Oh my gosh! So
we've got a lot.
All right, so there's probably like a half a dozen stories in here about CrowdStrike that we should probably avoid.
So, Matt is correct. Matt is correct. However,
wow.
Our good friend of the show, friend of mine, Mr. Robert Graham from Errata Security, I thought had the best article on the subject. And I haven't kind of delved into all the politics behind this, but apparently President Trump mentioned CrowdStrike in the Ukraine in context on a conversation that was obviously recorded. Robert has the transcript on his website, and then kind of just delves into the facts, which is what I like about. How hard is that to find today? Someone that reports on something that has to do with President Trump, and is not delving into politics and actually talking about facts.
It was so this goes back to the DNC hack, and CrowdStrike did some research to identify where the hack came from.
Yep.
And there was a lot of data where.
Now, did he research all the investigation?
They did part of the investigation. I don't know if they did all of it, but there was an investigation component from CrowdStrike looking at where the attack came from.
They investigated. It involved research. How's that?
Oh, that's even better, Jeff. And there was a link to Russia and potentially Ukraine. And so what the president did in his conversation that's created all this uppity-up in the news, and we'll stay away from that for a second, was asking if the server or the data from the server was actually in Ukraine, because everybody's trying to figure out what actually happened. And so CrowdStrike got pulled into that because CrowdStrike did some of the initial investigation work and attributed this to Russia and potentially Ukraine and Russia as part of this attack. So that's
and my also understanding to the ties to that CrowdStrike got involved was that they had identified some ties to the Ukraine, and it was demanded by President Trump that why are we having third parties do this analysis? Why hasn't the FBI done it? And their CrowdStrike's answer was, we turned over everything we had to the FBI. Like, we worked with them to make this happen.
Right.
Which is, I mean, that's difficult to do in terms of when you do that kind of stuff, maintaining a chain of custody of evidence if there's going to be some kind of legal or prosecution.
Right.
I don't know that that's one thing we talked about with Chris Hadnagy, but I was talking with him yesterday because he was at the same event, and we're talking about assisting law enforcement.
Yeah.
And so many of us are more than willing to assist law enforcement. But one of the things that, that we were talking about was, I'm like, hold on, wait. You have to maintain someone asked him another question. I was like, you have to maintain a chain of evidence and custody, and it's all like a thing about it. So in Chris's case, having an organization around it, I think really helps him. In CrowdStrike's case, having a formal company behind doing that, I think you're in a better position than if it's just a Paul or Larry or Matt going, hey, like I found this stuff on the internet. It might help your investigation. Right. I don't think helps, probably not at all in most cases. So.
Yes. So it's all over the news because it's a cybersecurity company that we track. It had a great IPO, but it got pulled into all this other news about the Ukraine transcript and all this other stuff.
Which is unfortunate.
Yes.
So
we'll leave it at that. Because
I strongly encourage our listeners to read Robert Graham's post on blog.erratasec.com. I thought it was the best one.
I think Wired has a decent take on it as well, which is the article that I put up.
Sure.
Like I said, there were no less than a half a dozen articles on this topic in there. So
it showed up.
I figured we should cover it and then move on.
Where do we want to go from there? What happened to Tyler, too, by the way?
I don't know. He's
not there
lost
anymore.
internet connectivity or something. Google wins landmark case. Right to be forgotten only applies in EU.
That's interesting.
I thought this was a very interesting case, right? Because is we've been going out in expanding our network into the EU, into Asia, and to others, to audiences, because about 20% of our audience listens from Europe. Mm-hmm. There's been all these questions about a right to be forgotten and GDPR and all these other things, right? And so this case goes back years. I think 14 was the original, 14 or 15 was the original start of aspects of this case, where there was this a lawsuit against Google about right to be forgotten, and the courts ruled, yeah, that only really applies to the EU. It's something that doesn't have to be done globally. Mm-hmm. It was just an interesting case. I don't think the search engines are out of the woods on this one. I don't think others are outside of the woods when it comes to GDPR.
They're storing a lot more data about people. And I think for us, whether we are forced to be compliant with that or not, it's a nice thing to implement. Because for us, in a lot of smaller companies, it's on a small scale. And it's a nice thing to have as a feature for the user. Like, look, in a lot of cases, if you want us to forget about you, just click on subscribe from our mailing list, and we've forgotten about you, right? Now, we may have to go back into our archives and look at the data that we store and make sure that any copies of that are removed, but that's pretty easy too,
and
right?
we've had to do that in a couple cases.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've had a couple instances where people are like, look, don't bug me anymore. I don't want to be in your mailing list. Fine. We've removed them and gone through our systems to make sure they're all completely extracted out. Because I don't want us as a small business to get caught into that web, right?
Right. But I also like it as a service to the user too. Like we'll honor your your request.
Yeah.
Totally.
You don't want to be part of the mailing list? Done. Good. We'll delete out. And so it's just a process that we kind of go through internally. But when you think about Google, and you think about a search engine that everybody's using to go find for stuff.
Servers and services and data stores. And
it's crazy.
And who they've shared it with. It's
crazy, all the links. And like you said, the sharing with the advertising and affiliates and all this stuff move in real time. I mean, how can you put the genie back in the bottle?
Right. Yep. It's a good analogy.
Mm-hmm. Very difficult. So this
he asks for 3 wishes and then he goes away, doesn't he?
Well, because then somebody else has to do it. Yeah. So I think the lesson here is, the scope of GDPR and right to be forgotten is limited to EU and EU people, and you're not going to get some global features. I still think there's going to be a lot of case law and a lot of lawsuits coming out of GDPR over time that are going to continue to define what's in and out of scope for that regulation. It's still very nebulous to a lot of people. We've seen some big fines levied for European companies that have breached data, like British Airways and some others.
Brian Lamoureux, we spoke with on Business Security Weekly this week and gave a presentation yesterday as well. I would look at him as definitely an expert, if not one of the most foremost experts in this particular topic as regulation pertains to big tech. His experience and background is astonishing in this area. He worked for some of the legal firms that were involved with big tobacco, which a lot of regulation there, obviously. Actually, recent legislation here in Rhode Island, and a dotted line to that with the whole vaping thing in Massachusetts and Rhode Island have passed legislation about that. And GDPR, I think, was instrumental in some of the first legislation. Now, spoil something from Brian's talk, but he credits this to a documentary I think that he watched, was that there was legislation in the U.S. pretty much the same thing as GDPR. And guess what happened? That legislation was thrown out the window.
Lobbyists.
September 11th.
Oh.
And very quickly, the Patriot Act,
threw it away.
was passed. And so I think that, and Brian, in crediting the documentary, attributes that to the rise and success of large companies, Apple, Google, Facebook, and all these large, Amazon, right? Because they didn't have any regulations to keep them in check. Now, I'm on the regulation. I take it on a case-by-case basis today. I think some people kind of fall on either side, whether regulation is good or bad. I look at it, and it was definitely Cory, what's his name that writes science fiction books? Cory Doctorow put me in check on that and said, look, Paul, like regulation can be really good. He's like, agreed, can be really bad, but it's on a case-by-case basis, right? Yeah. And I think that legislation such as GDPR and movements in the U.S., provided, again, case by case, if it's done right, could help to keep these companies in check. Because now, today in the U.S., I mean, we've experienced it. A lot of other people here and who are listening have experienced as well. In a lot of cases, these big tech companies, since they're not regulated, pretty much it's up to them what happens.
They do whatever they want.
You want to sell stuff in their store? Up to them. Arbitrary. You want to put content on their site? They determine whether it stays there or not. You know where I'm going with this. You want to use their API.
YouTube.
You want to use their API because there's something that's grinding my gears today. You want to use their API. They get to set the rules. And not only that, they either get to decide whether the rules exist or not, and whether or not
they can change them.
Or they can change them without your. They can say, hey, you know what? Guess what, YouTube? You're going to use our API. You've got 1 million points as your default quota, and that's great until such time other events happen, and they're like, yeah, no, you've got 500,000, and then you've got 20,000, and then you've got 10,000, and oh, by the way, you want more? There is a completely undocumented and undefined process for which you don't get a ticket number that you can apply for more, but it feels like completely arbitrary, like whether or not I'm even going to be successful in this process of getting more quota, because I'm still trying to understand the rules, and every communication is, oh, you have 3 business days to respond, as an example of how big tech, how much control they have over how you use their services and if you can use their services or not, which is a huge problem for me.
Yeah, and
a lot of people. Go ahead, Jeff.
Go, Jeff.
So I'm actually trying to skim through the article because the question I had that I was seeing if I could get the answer from the article is, so what does this mean? And I guess the question that I was really trying to answer is if it only applies in the EU, does that mean it only applies to citizens of the EU? It seems like the article was saying it only applies to Google search engines that are operated within the EU, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me if I'm in the United States, but I was in Canada last week, and there was a lot of websites that I couldn't get to because I was outside of the U.S. So I'm not familiar with what it's like to be in the EU and Googling, because presumably they use a different type of search engine, and there's something in play in terms of boundaries and limitations and things like that. So the basic question I ask is, what does this mean?
Well,
Feel
first
free,
of all,
anyone to jump in.
First of all, you were overseas.
In
'Cause
Canada.
you're in Canada.
That's right. I was overseas in Canada. Absolutely.
Number two is when you go into another country and you go to google.com, it may redirect you to google.fr for France or google.uk for Europe. And I think what this regulation's saying is that, yeah, if you're using one of those extensions, then the ability to be forgotten's there. But because google.com is more of a global domain, it doesn't apply to the google.com broader search engine. And so I'm not quite sure how this plays out, to be honest, Jeff, because, if I go to google.com and it redirects me to google.fr, for example, what's the difference for me as a user? Maybe I can't search as much, or I'm searching local domains, but I went to google.com and it redirected me. Does that mean my right to be forgotten is only there or part of the global site? I think this is what the regulation, this is what the ruling was saying, is like, it doesn't apply to all of Google, but maybe if you're in France, you go to google.fr, and in that particular case, in that subset, there has to be the ability to be right to be forgotten, but it doesn't apply to Google as a whole. And that's where things, I think, get really, really interesting. That's why the article says, look, I don't think search engines are out of the woods on this. And I think a lot of it depends on where you start, where you get redirected, and how search results come up. But again, this is crazy because
Well, I think the other part of my question, what I'm curious about is, what does this mean in terms of precedents for other companies that might be subject to following the right to be forgotten, or RTBF as they call it in the article? Companies that are perhaps U.S. based or otherwise, but they're operating internationally. Because a quick plug for someone that I've met this year, a woman named Amber Welch, who's given she actually keynoted Circle CityCon this year, and she was giving a talk on sort of this very topic and how to hack the right to be forgotten by going to companies and basically flooding them with requests to do the queries and the lookups, and do you have any of my personal data? And the way that things are set up these days, there's a certain dollar amount that it costs to process these things, and the way the rules are written, you have to respond to them. You can't just ignore them, even if you're clearly seeing that somebody's basically dossing you with a whole bunch of requests for information that clearly isn't anybody that's legitimately trying to get the information. So So a quick plug for Amber, if you're listening. She's actually speaking at Hacker Halted, Paul. So
Sweet.
hopefully we can maybe get her a quick interview, or at least go hear her talk. But I'm actually interested to see what she says about this case law determination, and sort of the larger, what does this mean in terms of precedents for other companies? Because yes, it helps maybe Google, but does it help anybody else?
So
probably. I mean, think of Salesforce.com. Think of some of these other large SaaS platforms that are based in the U.S. that might also have local domains in other countries because they're global. Potentially helps them as well from this ruling. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, Jeff.
Well, how much? I don't know the answer to this. That's why I'm asking the question. How much does Google separate their search engine? I mean, if they have a different domain for whatever country or region they're in, are they completely separate, or do they all tie together on the back end in terms of the big data that they're collecting?
You may never know.
So one of the there was an interesting comment in one of the articles I found on this, because this is also my number 4, is that the GDPR right to be forgotten only applies to results appearing in its searches within the 28-country EU bloc. I mean, that comes back to Mac's comment about Google.fr versus Google.ca or .com. So I guess they're only saying those services that are mapped to one of the 28 EU members is where we have to do the right to forgotten, or where they have to do the right to forgotten. And if you can compartmentalize like that, okay. It still feels like a slippery slope.
Yes.
Are we ready to move on?
Which is why case law will eventually set precedents for the future
That's the way it always
these
works.
regulations. Yes.
Always the way it always works.
Where do you want to go from here? I don't know that I have a smooth transition.
More martinis. That's
yeah,
where I want
after
to go.
that, more martinis. But
I have some over there. That means I have to get up.
or
One of the gentlemen from the
DevOps
ladies from the
or
back room.
life after a breach for a CISO or...
Well, you and I both had the DevOps story up, but...
Well, then do it.
All right. Does DevOps lead to improved security, or does it open up more security exposures? And at what point do we come together on those issues?
And is there any right answer? More importantly,
I think it's a difficult thing to... I think right now it's a difficult thing to measure. There was another story that kind of hinted towards like what's your cloud security.
Well,
and Matt and I have done some segments about your cloud security.
We've talked a lot about cloud security and DevOps and integration of security. This has been a topic of mine for
too many unknowns
years.
to know how much of a additional risk or less of a risk it is if you're using DevOps or if you're adopting cloud services, because largely it's untested waters for a lot of areas.
To give you an idea of how untested this is, 22% of firms at the highest level of security integration having reached an advanced stage of DevSecOps maturity compared to only 6% of firms with no security integration, right? Those are small numbers.
But what is advanced?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's...
And how do you measure that? And a presenter yesterday was talking about how when they poll their audience or their customers or whoever, thank you, that a small percentage will raise their hand and say, yes, we've implemented a full DevOps CI/CD pipeline. We're deploying all of our services into the cloud. And just that in of itself, security aside, and 3 to 5% roughly, right? And then someone stands up and says, and those 3 to 5% are lying, right? And how do you really know?
Right.
What does it really mean? And so I think this whole notion that DevOps practices are in fact leading to improved security really just requires more research, because we haven't even developed the methods for which to measure.
Yeah.
Like you can say, yes, we're more secure. Okay, but how did you measure your security? Is it because you haven't had security incidents? Well, does that just mean that...
Bless you.
Bless you. You all right there, Jeff?
Sorry, little allergy.
Little allergy to bullshit there.
But the other thing is so in this was like 3,000 respondents, right? Which is pretty good sample size, by the way. Additionally, the report found that Europe is pulling ahead of the U.S. and the Asia-Pacific region when it comes to firms with an overall significant to full integration status. Now, over the U.S., I agree. If you break down APJ by country, I'm not quite sure, because I think Australia is actually doing a fantastic job at this. So I don't. You've got to look under the covers to say, well, APJ as a whole, because APJ is really big. But if you look at Australia, who's been really advanced when it comes to DevOps processes, integration of containers, cloud adoption, I mean, they're as a single country are probably doing more than any other country around the world.
See, but
and you look at these numbers and you're like, well, Europe, really? I mean, I haven't seen that.
I think all that is largely bullshit, because when we push into a DevOps world, we may get the notion that, hey, we're seeing less security incidents. That's because you don't have visibility into seeing them anymore, right? That could be one thing.
That could be one of it. Yeah.
So I'm just...
It all depends how you measure it.
This is true.
That's right.
Yeah, and what I'm not seeing in the U.S., outside of a few very specific examples, tight integration of security into the DevOps process. And to me, because they don't have that, they don't know half the stuff that's going on until the breach actually happens. And we've seen those breaches all over the place.
I haven't seen in my somewhat limited experience, I haven't seen security at all baked into DevOps. Too often, in my experience.
Yeah, and admittedly, in your experience, fair enough.
I mean,
Inherently, it gives us the capability to push out security fixes more quickly, theoretically.
Right. Theoretically, it does. If you've got the different tools integrated in at the different levels of the CI/CD pipeline.
But it doesn't.
I've got a great presentation on this, and there's a really good segment on ESW about aspects of this.
What it doesn't change is the amount of developer time it takes to fix security bugs. Maybe over time, right, as you're fixing things more quickly and in more smaller chunks, that when there is a security vulnerability, it's not as much work because you've been doing updates and making changes over time to make your software better. One could argue that. But the thing that, like, if you're didn't do this one thing and you find a vulnerability, the fact that you can push it out faster doesn't change how long it's going to take you to code in that fix, especially if it's an architectural
If it's Python 2.7 to 3.0, right?
Yeah, there's like a million examples, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But we all know that you got to be on the latest binaries in your DevOps process.
Yep.
And sometimes that's an architectural shift, and there's a lot of regression that has to happen to make those jumps and those leaps into version changes. Does DevOps potentially help you with that? Yes. If you've got a really good integration process and really good regression QA test set up, yeah, it's a lot easier.
So you could, so I guess I'm mistaken. I think it does help you make security bug fixes in a more timely manner, because when I go in and make a change to the code base, now my regression testing, as you mentioned specifically, it runs automatically. So that does mean I can make changes more quickly. So in that sense, you're correct.
There are advantages, but it's only if you have all the other pieces integrated in. Yes.
Yeah.
Jeff,
And you still
hold on, Jeff, then Lee.
Oh, no, Lee can go first.
Okay, Lee, then Jeff.
All right. So I'm still thinking about the articles we see about developers in a hurry checking in their passwords and private keys into the repository that then gets deployed.
We'll talk about that story next, and I'll put some context behind that because I've lived it in all 5 of those cases.
I can hold at that point, because I'm just thinking, what I was going to say is you got to have, whether you're doing DevSecOps or not, there has to be rigor behind development, regardless of your methodology.
Agreed.
It's got to be in there.
And you've got to integrate it into the various stages of your integration deployment pipeline so that you're not storing credentials in a place that's bad.
But okay, so on that point specifically, and I was going to give some more examples and more meat to my bold, gross statement. But you're saying you have to. I see. No, you don't have to. Nobody's monitoring that. Nobody's holding any developer's feet to the fire to do that. Too often it's not happening. So to give a couple examples of what I mean by I'm not seeing it, and I have to cite PCI. So PCI requires
take a drink.
Drink. We're all drinking. Hold on. We need a drink. Okay. Good.
PCI requires for application developers, QSAs are supposed to interview a sample of, some of the application developers, try to get a feel for, are they knowledgeable about common, coding gotchas. OWASP top 10 is an emphasis. There's also supposed to be something called a software development lifecycle. Now, many of us on this episode used to work for a software company, and for my entire tenure, when I asked to see a copy of the software development lifecycle, nobody could produce one. Not saying it didn't exist. I don't think it existed.
It still doesn't exist, by the way. Just FYI.
I'm willing to concede that in the modern world, with the different way of doing code development with DevOps and whatever, that the concept of an SDLC maybe has gone away. But it bugs me that, in the design phase, think about security. In the development phase, think about security. In the testing phase, think about security. In the implementation phase, think about security, which is something that's supposed to be baked into an SDLC. I don't see that. Not only do I not see that being, existing in customers that I have that I consult and advise, I don't see it being required, thought about. I've asked many people that claim to be doing DevOps or DevSecOps or SecDevOps, and I wish Hoodie was on that could school us on what the differences are. But I don't see people having any concept of security at all. I think they act very often on the assumption that the building blocks that they're using are secure. The architecture, the platform, it's somebody else has got it. Somebody else is taking care of it. Their job is to write the code and make it work. I'm happy to be proven wrong. That's what I see.
No, I agree with you 100%, Jeff. This is why every time I go out and talk about this topic is people have to understand that security is not at the end of the pipeline. It's not at the end of the process. It's not at the end right before a release. It has to be moved back as concept to shift left. You can use whatever term you want. And so you're right. Dev doesn't care. Dev doesn't have to care. Development's job is to meet a set of business requirements, get them coded, and get that release out. It is security's responsibility to step in and say, look, let me understand what you guys are doing. Let me integrate some tools into the process so that we can validate steps along the CI/CD pipeline so that when the code is ready to be released, you don't have to listen to me say, wait a minute, I need a couple weeks. I got to go out and pen test this thing to make sure it's secure and then allow you to release or not.
So I think security needs a voice in this process at all times.
Agreed.
And I'll give you an example of why. I made a really, really poor coding mistake the other day. And it stems from a coding...
And I'm going to say right now, Mike Poor takes offense that you take his name in vain.
Yes.
You made a really erroneous programming mistake.
I made an erroneous... I made a mistake. And so here's
you violated the Security Weekly SDLC, no doubt.
Probably. But so here's what happened. I ran into a situation where I couldn't log into my own application. I forget the exact issue, whether it was code-related, database-related, config-related, but something led to the fact, and there is this mysterious bug in the application that we're developing where, like, sometimes no user accounts are valid. So with the hacker, so then, like, I take my developer hat off and I put my hacker hat on, and I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. I can't come at this from a developer perspective. I got to come at this from a hacker perspective. I'm like, okay, what do I have? I have access to the source code. That means I can do things that will get me in. So I'm like, where in the source code does it validate the user's password?
Just return true all the time.
Exactly what I did, Larry. It was like, if your password hash, right, matches the one in the database, then return true, else return false. I was like, well, if true, exactly what Larry said, because Larry has his hacker hat on. Look, I have access to the source code.
If user equals true and user equals true, then
let
you in.
But somewhere in the cycle, I may have flipped it back then, but then I may have to flip it the other way, right? And then, so like a week or two goes by, and I'm in the source code, and I'm like, wait a minute. If true, I'm like, I didn't put that back.
You didn't put it back.
I'm like, so for a whole week, it didn't matter what your username or password was.
It was always true.
It was always true. And I'm like, wow, I really need to write a test to be able to check for that. And I
trust, since we're talking about it, that you've fixed it.
I have fixed it. Yes, I have.
And that's the traditional
like
thing
on
that
Monday.
we're supposed to do on the pen test side is, great, yeah, your authentication works, but what happens when you put in garbage authentication? Does it let you in? Does it always answer true?
Right. So my point is, and that's somewhat
CI/CD doesn't always work.
It doesn't. It works as well.
It worked exactly as
I mean,
planned.
it worked,
except for
but
wait,
here's the thing.
that should only be in test and development. It should never be in production.
What Matt was saying before, that developers are responsible for making the application functional. This is a good example of a coding mistake. The application was even more functional. Users did not have any trouble logging in whatsoever. Yeah. So on that front, it was cool. But on the security side, if a test for a condition does not exist, therefore the release pushes out. And you can have the best DevOps CI/CD pipeline in the world, but if you don't have a test for various conditions, I think security is always going to be there to help apply those conditions. As technology and software changes.
It's available. It's not always required or involved, because there's this impression that either somebody else has got it covered. I don't have to worry about. It's taken care of somewhere else. It's taken care of by somebody else. To use a network analogy, and any rule fixes most network problems.
Yep.
And
Which was
interesting-
always the last rule in your firewall table for a long time.
You know how I caught the bug?
Yep.
It was actually my linting tool that said like this variable is never referenced because if true it would always be true. So the next code block, the else, was never executing, and my linting tool was like, you're never referencing this variable or this, there's something in the linting that led me there. And I was like, oh. So, I mean, for that reason, I really like inside the IDE, that source code analysis, static analysis inside, source code analysis inside
and that's
your
why I
IDE.
always talk about security needing to work with the DevOps teams
Yes.
to understand what they're doing, and then how to take some of the tools that have always been done after the fact and bring them back and integrate them into steps in the process to say, oh, we caught that bug. Oh, we saw this. What's going on, development team? Oh, yeah, and they fix it. The sooner you catch it, the better it is for the overall stability and security of the application. But that means we as security professionals have to have the conversations with the development teams to figure out how to integrate all these tools we've bought that we use at the end, but no, use them earlier in the process.
And I truly believe we need an expansion of our tests. I think it's great to have things like the OWASP top 10 and all interview developers like PCI is saying about cross-site scripting and SQL injection, but we need to make sure that our tests are exhaustive for a lot of different scenarios, and not all of them may apply today, but as technology and code changes, they could be applicable. So now, okay, I found that one bug and I have a test for that, but now I'm like, what else could people screw up in this whole login process that I want a more exhaustive set of tests to run every time I check in code?
Your examples is a great test case. I was going to ask, and this is not meant to be a pop quiz on anybody's knowledge of the current OWASP top 10, but would the OWASP top 10 tests against the current OWASP top 10, would that have discovered what's essentially what I'm hearing, a logic error in your code?
Yeah,
I'm
it would
not
be an input.
100%.
I think under input validation, there might be a
Yeah,
it
but
might
it's
have
not.
Authentication
but-
bypass.
It would be authentication bypass, if anything. I'm not sure if it handled, Jeff, my specific use case where the application just accepts anything.
anything.
You know, when we as
that-
security
that-
people even think of authentication, we're like, make sure there's no default password, make sure there's no easily guessable password, make sure there's no backdoor.
These got
right?
a comment here.
But missing or not validating the authentication is part of it, right?
Yep. The
But as
Yeah, well,
Larry
I-
said, I mean, it was an old technique, and hopefully it's not a good technique to use anymore. But you still have to try it.
Right.
The null password.
Yes.
Put in garbage and does it work?
Yeah,
That
so
should be standard test.
Lee.
Yeah, so the one of the OWASP top 10, I was just trying to find out which one it was while we were going on. Yeah, it's number 2, broken authentication. I think that covers it there, Paul.
Yeah, but how it's broken? Because I could have.
Right,
I
yeah.
think
Well,
the form
right.
in and of it. So here's an example of like missing password. Right, the form before it even gets to my backend code says no. You got to enter a password. So I catch that in the HTML or JavaScript in the form. It was if you had a value.
Right.
In that is that process valid? And again, that's just one example. So there's lots of different ways developers can introduce vulnerabilities.
Right.
And I think the security, to go back to our conversation of DevOps, is your security improving? It's only improving as the quality of your tests are improving. And I still think we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that the tests you implement are testing for all of these use cases above and beyond what might be standards or guidelines even. And a lot of that could be specific to your application. Also along the lines of developing in code, White Source published a good article on the top 5 things that you can make security-wise, security mistakes in Git. And just to put some color and context around those, hard coding sensitive data. And even though this is a problem, but even though Git might check for certain keys to be in your code, that doesn't mean you can't still hard code something into your application that Git is missing. And this fixing the problem can oftentimes lead to architectural issues that take a long time to fix, therefore making it a serious issue. The other one was ignoring your .git ignore. In other words, don't check these files in when I make a Git check-in. And I'm not sure if they go in the details here, but oftentimes what happens is one of the first things you do is set up a new project, and it creates your .git ignore file, but then you forget to update it. So you implement some other piece of functionality, and you do a check-in, and you forgot to update your git ignore so that a secrets file or some other piece of information gets checked in. So it's not just ignoring it, but always remembering to update it as a regular process that I think is the problem. Unsigned commits are very interesting. I think you should make people sign their commits. However, I think a lot of the mistakes that are introduced in code via commits come from people that already have signed access to your Git repository. I can vouch for that 100%. When I screw something up, I could sign all my commits all I want, but I still was able to commit that, that authentication bypass vulnerability in. So while that does help for third parties maybe trying to make commits, a lot of the security vulnerabilities I think are made by developers who already have access and are signing their commits. Of course, leaving the front door open, your own credentials as a developer, and not patching is a big one. Again, Git actually has checks, and in fact, we just implemented a Python library update that wiped out a bunch of alerts that were being generated by Git. They were saying, look, the library that you're including in your code that's ultimately in your container that's being deployed has vulnerabilities.
Yep.
Now, the analysis that I did, I prioritized that with our master schedule for software development. I'm like, there are nothing's like on fire right now. We may not be using some of the functionality in that library that's vulnerable, so I rated the risk accordingly. This is also where I think security and development can work together.
Yep.
So you need that security person there with development to help make that decision that the impact is XYZ. It's not the earth, the something's on fire. It's, in the next 3 months, let's make sure that we update all the libraries.
The challenge with containers, for example, is when you pull down a library like PHP. It's got shadow, curl, and a bunch of other binaries in it, which have a ton of vulnerabilities. But you may not be using shadow or curl or other things in your code, right?
Yeah.
And the challenge is stripping those out is not necessarily easy sometimes.
And in the Python example, I might be pulling down requests was one of the libraries that had a vulnerability. Requests has a ton of modules and classes within it. I may be only using a request.get, right? Well, that didn't have the vulnerability, so maybe I'm not using that. But Git is flagging that you're importing all of requests, so you could have that. Now, the fix is really nice because, and this is where DevOps saves you time. I can say, look, build my new container with all the latest versions of the library, fix all the problems, run through all of my tests, and if it passes, pushes it out. That's a huge advantage. Jeff.
Before we do that,
hold on, Jeff, then Larry. Jeff's been raising his hand for a while, Larry.
Well,
PCI.
Well, it's not really PCI. Just based on what you just said, I think the prevailing attitude, especially when we start talking about containers, is patching almost goes away. You just you blow things up and you just keep reloading the current and the latest, which technically I think is patching, but it's not
I agree.
patched the way we consider it. But the classic argument that developers and administrators have made for as long as we've been in this business is the concern that installing a patch or updating to the latest version breaks the critical application that's running the business. How is that addressed or addressed is the best word I can come up with in the container world, using the concept of we just blow things up and just keep loading the current.
That's where regression testing and your QA tests have to come in, Jeff. If you've got the right QA tests in place to regression test functionality, then you know that when you upgrade from version 2.7 to 3.0 in Python, we'll know whether functionality got regressed because the QA test will fail.
We'll know what failed and what didn't, right? So we have we have better visibility into what we have to fix to make a more informed decision, maybe about how much time it will take to fix it. We can implement fixes, run through that regression test, even as a separate process, right? We can have a whole feature branch this is the application on the whole new version, and we just continue to iterate, and maybe we put a separate team to continue to iterate to get us to the latest version. Then we merge those features back into the main line. The other half of the development team is implementing features and fixing bugs, while another portion of the team is working on the next upgrade. At some point, they merge together, which sounds easy, but it's really kind of a nightmare. But modern tools make it much better and easier to do that merge. And then the code base merges together, and now the latest bugs, features, and all the updates, the libraries and web servers and application servers are merged together in the current release.
Yeah. Not only does that sound optimistic, that just sounds idealistic. I don't know many organizations that function at that level of just having enough personnel to focus on all that.
And Jeff, I agree, and I think that and I said it earlier in our webcast today too, was it boils down to the resources you have for development and how you prioritize them. DevOps doesn't take away, and even building a DevOps and CI/CD pipeline takes development time, and at some point, at least one or more of your developers has to take a timeout, or even a portion of one developer says, I'm going to spend the morning doing this, the afternoon doing that. Like, at some point, you're not fixing bugs or implementing new features in some capacity on your development team to either address a security vulnerability by upgrading a library or building a DevOps and CI/CD pipeline from the technology standpoint, let alone the process implications of that.
In anyone's experience, and again, I'm willing to be proven wrong or told that I'm blowing smoke, but PCI requires patching of critical security patches, installation of critical security patches within 30 days of release.
PCI.
What you describe, we're already acknowledging that it sometimes often doesn't exist in organizations, but if it does exist, is it structured? Is it capable of meeting this 30-day objective? Is the 30-day objective even still reasonable?
So there are really good use cases of companies that I think are doing a really good job at this. Netflix and Etsy and others that have been, they're more advanced, way advanced.
I think as you get more advanced, Matt, I don't know if this is where you're going, that 30 days becomes more reasonable.
Way reasonable.
The more you implement it, the less technical debt you have, the less time it should take you to fix something.
So but that's like the 1%. The rest of the world, operates with very small teams. Yep. They're pulled in 1,000 directions. The priorities are keeping everything up and running and keeping everything operational. While I agree in everything we're saying, what should be done, there's very little that compels all these organizations to actually do any of this.
That I disagree with. I think that there is not just security benefits to building out this infrastructure for your software development or for your IT infrastructure, in that it doesn't just give you the ability to fix security bugs more quickly. It gives you the ability to implement features more quickly and fix bugs more quickly, in addition to addressing security issues more quickly. The business driver, if I were sitting with a board or an executive team meeting with my CEO or a CEO of a large corporation, I'd say, look, the first benefit is our development team can push features out more quickly. We can more quickly get to. Now, we have to maybe take a timeout for a little while. Maybe it's a couple weeks, 30 days, 2 months, or whatever.
It's priority number 3 on your list.
After that, we will be able to implement features 30% in 30% less time than before. And that's when the board's going to be like, yeah, you know what? Matt goes, take your time out. Go do that one thing. Maybe you break it up into phases too. I think we're talking about this in kind of like binary terms. You break it up into phases. Like, take a time out in 2 weeks. Do this piece, then go spend 2 weeks doing bugs and features, then take another time out, do this other piece, and eventually you get to the point where when management comes to you and says, we want to support this whole new functionality, and you're like, great, I can do that almost half the time we could before because, we spent some of our development resources, doing the whole...
So we've come full circle. You say implement it in phases. I agree with that, but that also sounds a whole lot like a software development lifecycle.
Sure.
Which again, I go back to most DevOps people that I've talked to are not familiar with that concept.
Yeah. No, but it is a life cycle, and I think it's more of a utopian vision if you're looking just at a binary thing. It definitely is happening in phases. That's why we don't see a lot of organizations claiming we've reached utopia and we've got all these pieces in place, right? Because it's applications are largely broken up, and I think we sometimes think of them as we have an application, right? No, applications have multiple pieces. You've got maybe the storage piece here, you've got the app server here, you've got code that runs locally, you've got code that runs in this service, some of the code's up in serverless, and so it's a huge matrix anytime you look at an application today. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, it was more of the apps running on this server and there's a firewall in front of it, and it was a lot more kind of linear and in one piece. But now the ability to spread that technology out is at our fingertips, and we're in different phases and different aspects
and
of our
spreading your
applications.
development teams out across all these different aspects. One of the things we used to do at RSA, we had a continuing engineering team. Their job was to, they were all bug fixes, right? They were patching issues, they were fixing bugs, and they were a separate stream outside of the development for new features,
right? And typically your UI team is separate from the database team, which is separate from the application and backend team. And even in our small organization, there's contractors we use for WordPress work that are working in conjunction with myself and other developers that are working on our internal back office application, and those are tied together. And at certain points, we kind of like merge functionality and move on to the next stage. So yeah, it's not a this is our code and it's going to get updated kind of thing.
And there's no easy way to depict this in a picture for most.
You need like a 3-dimensional graph or something.
Wizard chess.
Yeah.
So a question.
Yes.
When did we move from Security Weekly to DevOps Security Weekly?
That's called Application Security Weekly.
Application Security Weekly. Yeah,
that's on Mondays.
Okay. Well, it sounded like it was today, but I was just checking.
I was really just, and I have to run soon.
And by the way, I never got to my point, but we're so far past it now that it doesn't bother.
Do you guys want to?
I want to hear Larry's point.
It's too late. We're too far past it now. We're way too far past it.
Sorry.
How much do you guys want to go longer? I mean, because I got to duck out.
Smart home and we can leave.
Yes.
Okay. Let's do it.
Smart home and leave.
Smart home and leave. Oh, was that my story?
I think it was your story.
It was my story.
No, it was not. I was going to say it wasn't my story. It was a scene right from Mr. Robot.
Hackers takes over a couple smart home, pumps music, vulgar music. They didn't say what the music was, and plays with the temperature. This could happen to you.
Yeah, but
no,
how
it
do
could
they
happen
do it?
to Paul. It can't happen to me because I don't interconnect all my stuff.
And I'll tell you what, it can. What I've learned, and I was talking to Jesse from Compass. He's an instructor at NAIT, cybersecurity coach. He did a talk on IoT. And I was talking to him after his talk, and I said, one of the things you hit on was something that I've realized. I've been upgrading the smart IoT technology in my home. And when I realized, and from covering previous stories as well, and what Jesse showed, is basically if you're on the same network as these smart home devices, there is no authentication. And I've noticed, we've covered stories where the Philips Hue light bulbs, and I noticed this when I got a new Philips Hue hub, and I had to reassociate all my light bulbs. All I need is the serial number, and I can take over control of that light bulb. Like, how much you want to bet that serial number is broadcast in some kind of wireless technology that I can sniff? And if that's all I need to take it over, like I'm punching it in on the app, I'm like, it's just accessing the API that's on that bulb.
And then you send that API request to Burp Intruder.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing was my oldest son connected to my Sonos and was making changes because a lot of these technologies, Sonos and Philips Hue and others, assume that if you're on the same network, and the manufacturers will tell you, no, we're not going to fix this bug because we assume that you have a secure Wi-Fi network. Okay, but what happens when I drop malware on your Android device or whatever it is on your internal network, and I take over your entire smart home? And I think that's exactly... If
like drop
when
malware on your Android device?
Yeah.
You mean
like
when?
When a device on your network gets malware, that means I can go control your smart home. So one, I think, piece of advice, Jeff, that I have without really talking about the details of this story, just based on speculation, is you need to, and businesses need to do this as well, This is one place where network segmentation and wireless segmentation, wireless network and Ethernet network segmentation is a really good measure, right?
But think of the consumer. How many people know how to segment their wireless networks in their home?
And it's a huge pain in the ass. Let's say, like my network right now is a flat wireless network at home. Now I got to go to every single one of my smart devices and start flipping its Wi-Fi connection, which is depending on the device, can be a huge pain in the ass. I have to reassociate because a lot of those you connect over, Larry, Bluetooth Low Energy. Correct me if I'm wrong. To get the initial connection, and you tell the device, here's my Wi-Fi network and here's its password, and it goes off to the device. So now I've basically got to reset the networking for every single smart device in my home, which takes time.
We all know how to do that, but the
now put
typical
that on the regular
consumer
user
is just going to put up a Wi-Fi,
and
they're going to
works.
broadcast the SSID, they may or may not put a password on it, and next thing you know, they're associating everything to it. They don't know how to segment their home networks.
Right.
Oh,
But the kicker is if you want to control those devices, now your device that you control them
Now has
also
to connect
has
to
be
that
on
other.
that network.
Right.
And so if someone compromises my Android phone and I'm at home, now they have access to my smart home. So it's not a great solution. I really want to look into my latest thought on this, and it was just a very fleeting thought, was I need some sort of API gateway that the devices can't talk to another device. They have to talk through the gateway, and I can somehow control access. Or even better, the device manufacturers are able to build authentication into all these APIs, but the technology is so ubiquitous and so different that doing that is not feasible.
The best line in this whole article is, "My heart was racing," Samantha told Fox 6 News. I felt so violated at this point.
Well, yeah.
That was for Sam.
We're right back to porn.
We're
So violated.
and right back to Mr. Robot, which has the, I mean, Jesse showed that scene yesterday at the conference where they take over the smart home, and it's very much a reality. I mean, Jesse showed that a Google Home device will accept a command unauthenticated over the API to reset the device to factory defaults.
Done.
Game
So-
over, man.
Yep.
And all it is just a JSON request. I mean, I was looking at it was just JSON request. It was just like, yeah, okay,
Good
I'll reset.
God.
Oh, some of them you need the system ID or the system name. Well, guess what? You can send an unauthenticated request to the device, and they'll spit you back its system name or system ID, and then you spit back the request, the post request that changes and they all work in a very similar manner. He also had an IRC server that was on a robotic vacuum. What? It was running an IRC. I don't know why. He's still reaching. We'll bring him on the show, talk about some of the stuff.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
That'd be fun.
So, Jeff, that was your
All right.
story, but we talked about it.
No, I don't have all that smart stuff in my home. I'm an old curmudgeon type person.
You and me
So-
both, baby. I don't connect stuff.
How do you turn your lights on and off and set the temperature?
It's called a light switch.
Right.
Thermostat, light switch, wall
There's a
switch.
on your thermostat, there's like a schedule, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's when I'm home, here's
Right.
when I'm not home, here's what I just program it and I let it run.
I know.
Wait, you can program it? Because when I grew up,
But
you,
you
didn't
have to-
you had that little knob that, when you were home, you went in and you walked over and you turned it up.
But all the
'cause
new
that was
ones, the
schedule.
Honeywells and all these other ones,
you
you
can
can set
program
a schedule, you're done.
Yeah, but you got to get up from your... Anyway.
Come on, Paul. You still remember when you were the remote for your grandfather?
Yes, I do.
But and that's the thing, Paul. I mean, you always have to get up because the beer is all the way over there in the refrigerator.
Right.
So,
Right. Until you come up with a robot that's running IRC to go over and grab you a beer and bring it to you and pop it open, you got to get your butt off.
Related.
I call those kids.
There is a $2.5 million battle robot because the company went bankrupt on sale at eBay right now for $70,000.
That's a steal.
That's right.
Ooh, we should buy two.
Well, there's only one.
All right,
There's only one left.
Closing thoughts?
Closing thought. Many years ago, I think I might have actually still been working for the DoD. So 20-some years ago, I came home from work one day, and my son greets me at the door and says, "Dad, the TV's broken." So I was like, "Oh, that's terrible." I walked over to the TV and I pushed the on button. I pushed the up channel, down channel button, the volume button. It's like, everything seems to be working fine, son. He picked up the remote and started pointing at it and clicking. He's like, "No, Dad, it's broken." And that's where I proceeded to tell him the story of, when I was a kid, if you wanted to get a station, you had to spin a dial and get it just right to get the frequency. And there was this external box that you would spin the dial. And if you were good at it, you could spin it and run outside far enough away from the house in time to see the antenna actually move.
The rotator.
I had one of those when I was little.
Yep.
We used to climb it as a kid.
My grandparents had a TV that had one of the first remote controls. And it was done
It was
via
wired.
No, it was done via microwave.
Ooh.
Literally
I think-
microwave. It was crazy.
I think the first one we had was like a 6-foot cable to it. So I don't know.
that was our VCR. It had a
How many
30-foot
people
cable.
watch? I don't
30
know how
foot
many
cable.
people watch TV 6 feet away, but whatever. Anyway.
No, because
Anyway.
Anyway, that will conclude the show.
Yeah.
So
That's
thank
a
you.
wrap.
That's a wrap. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. Larry, take us out.
Over and out of here.